The dust of the settlement choked her, but she didn't cough. A cough was a sound, and a sound drew attention. She had learned long ago to be quiet, to take up as little space as a girl of her size could. To be a shadow, even in the harsh, unforgiving sun. Her father, his breath thick with the sour smell of cheap corn liquor, shoved her forward. The men on the saloon porch laughed. They were always laughing at her. A stout girl, one of them had called her once, his eyes crawling over her frame like greasy insects. Good for work, if not for looking at her father hadn't defended her. He had nodded, as if assessing a sow at market. Today, she was the market goods. She was a burden. She had always been a burden. Pa's dead, Ma followed him into the grave a winter later, and her brother, Jed, had a new wife with a sharp face and an even sharper tongue. There was no room, no food, no patience for a sister who was too large, too plain, too much. So they had brought her here, to the edge of the known world, to a dusty outpost where men traded desperation and lies. Jed stood beside their father now, his face a mask of pinched resentment. "She's strong," he said, his voice loud and thin. "Can cook, clean, mend. Works like an ox." He said the word ox with a particular cruelty, a final twist of the knife he'd been sticking in her side since they were children. She kept her eyes on the cracked planks of the porch. If she didn't look at them, they weren't real. The shame was a hot cloak, heavy and suffocating. A man with a stained beard and a missing tooth spat a brown stream of tobacco juice near her worn boots. "What'll you take for her?" he sneered. "A sturdy mule? A few barrels of flour." Her father held up a hand. "Whiskey," he said, his voice raspy with thirst. "Good whiskey. Enough to last us the ride home and then some." The men laughed again, a harsh, grating sound. She was worth a few bottles of brown liquid. That was the sum of her life. She squeezed her eyes shut, praying for the earth to open and swallow her. Let it be over. Let it all be over. Then, a new silence fell. It was different from the usual quiet she inhabited. This was a heavy, deliberate silence that commanded the space, pushing back against the jeers and the heat. A man stepped out of the long shadows of the livery stable. He was tall, but moved with a quiet grace that made him seem a part of the landscape itself. He wasn't like the others. His clothes were clean, worn but cared for. His face was weathered by sun and wind, etched with lines that spoke of distance and solitude, not cheap liquor and petty cruelties. His eyes, dark and steady, passed over the laughing men without interest. They landed on her. And for the first time in her life, she felt seen. Not measured, not judged, not dismissed. Just seen. The man on the porch with the stained beard scoffed. "Look here, it's the half-breed, come to watch the show." The tall man's gaze didn't waver from hers. He didn't flinch. He didn't speak. He simply watched her, and in that look, she saw a question. It wasn't "what are you worth," but something else entirely. Something she couldn't name. He turned his head slowly, his eyes finally moving to her father. His voice, when it came, was low and calm, like stones shifting at the bottom of a river. "I have supplies," he said. Not to her father, but to the air itself. "Flour. Salt pork. Coffee. No whiskey." Her father's eyes, greedy and small, lit up. "How much?" The quiet man looked back at her. For a long, breathless moment, the world seemed to hold its breath. The dust hung suspended in the air. The laughter died in the men's throats. Then he spoke again, 3 words that cleaved her life in 2. For the girl, the world tilted. Her father and brother gaped, then a slow, incredulous smile spread across her father's face. He had expected to barter, to be haggled down. He had been offered a fortune. "Done," he spat, before the man could change his mind. The transaction was complete. She had been traded for coffee and flour. She was no longer a burden on her family. She was the property of a silent stranger who looked at her as if she were not a beast of burden, but a person. He nodded once, a short, sharp gesture. He turned and walked back toward the livery, expecting her to follow. She took a single, shuddering breath. Behind her, she heard the pop of a cork and her father's triumphant laugh. She didn't look back. She straightened her shoulders, just a fraction, and followed the silent man into the shadows, away from the only life she had ever known. The journey began in that same crushing silence. He loaded a pack mule with the goods he had traded for her life, his movements economical and sure. He didn't speak to her. He didn't tell her where they were going. He simply mounted his own horse, a lean, tough-looking Mustang, and gestured with his head for her to climb onto the spare mare. The horse was smaller than the ones on her family's hardscrabble farm, and she hesitated, the old shame flaring. She was too heavy. She would hurt it. She waited for the inevitable jeer, the impatient command. It never came. He just waited, his expression unreadable, his patience a vast and unnerving thing. Swallowing her fear, she pulled herself into the saddle. The leather groaned in protest, and her cheeks burned, but the man said nothing. He simply turned his horse and set off, heading north, away from the sun-baked hell of the settlement and into the rising foothills. The first day was a trial of fear. Every rustle in the sagebrush was a snake. Every shadow was a bandit. Every moment she expected him to turn on her, to reveal the cruelty she knew all men possessed. He was just biding his time. He would use her, beat her, and abandon her when he was done. It was the way of things. She knew. But he did none of it. When they stopped at midday, he slid from his horse and built a small, smokeless fire with an efficiency that was mesmerizing. He unpacked a skillet, bacon, and coffee. He cooked, and then handed her a tin plate with a full share. Not the scraps. Not the leftovers. A full, equal share. She stared at it, her stomach churning with a confusion so profound it felt like nausea. He ate his own meal without looking at her, his gaze fixed on the distant, purple mountains that were their destination. That night, when the air grew teeth and the stars were chips of ice in a black sky, he unrolled 2 bedrolls. He gestured for her to take one, the thicker of the 2. He laid his own closer to the fire, placing himself between her and the vast, dark unknown of the wilderness. He didn't speak. He didn't touch her. He just lay down, a silent guardian in the night. She lay awake for hours, clutching the rough wool of the blanket, listening to the sound of his steady breathing. It was the first time she had ever felt, not safe, not yet, but less afraid. The next day was the same. And the next. The silence between them began to change. It was no longer a void of terror, but a space. A space to breathe. A space to think. On the 4th day, her foot slipped on a loose rock as she dismounted, and she fell, hard, into the dusty trail. She landed with a heavy thud that knocked the wind from her lungs, and she braced herself, tears of humiliation stinging her eyes. She waited for the laughter, the curse, the word "oh clumsy sore socks." Instead, she heard the soft scuff of his boots. A hand appeared in front of her face. It was large, calloused, and clean. It did not pull or grab. It just offered. Tentatively, as if touching fire, she placed her hand in his. His fingers closed around hers, strong and firm, and he lifted her to her feet as if she weighed nothing at all. He let go immediately, his eyes scanning the trail ahead as if nothing had happened. But something had happened. It was the first time a man had touched her with anything but contempt or violence. The touch lingered on her skin long after his hand was gone. It was a brand of a different kind. He had not only seen her, he had lifted her up. She began to watch him, really watch him. The way he read the land, the way he cared for the horses before himself, the way his hands, though rough, were gentle with the reins. He never wasted emotion, never wasted a word. His quietness was not an absence of thought, but a presence of it. She realized he wasn't just a half-breed, as the man in town had sneered. His features, the line of his jaw, the way he moved, spoke of a deep connection to this land that the loud, blustering men in the settlement could never comprehend. He was of this place, and it was of him. They traveled for 2 weeks, climbing higher into the mountains. The air grew thin and crisp, scented with pine and damp earth. The world became a cathedral of towering trees and granite cliffs. Here, away from the judging eyes of people, the weight on her soul began to lift, little by little. She found she could breathe more deeply. The constant, nagging voice in her head that told her she was worthless grew fainter, drowned out by the whisper of the wind through the pines. They found a small, hidden valley, a bowl of green cupped in the hands of stone peaks. A creek, clear and cold, tumbled through it. This, it seemed, was their destination. He dismounted, and for a long time, he just stood there, surveying the valley. A look of peace settled on his face, a softening of the hard lines around his eyes. This was his sanctuary. He began to work. From sunup to sundown, he moved with a relentless, steady purpose. He felled trees, his axe swinging in a powerful, hypnotic rhythm. He notched the logs with an artistry she had never witnessed. He was not just building a shelter, he was creating a home. At first, she stood by, useless, a spectator to her own life. The old shame returned. She was a burden, just as her brother had said. She could cook, clean, mend. But what good was that here? One morning, as he was wrestling a heavy log into place, she saw him stumble. Without thinking, she rushed forward and put her shoulder to the wood, adding her strength to his. He grunted, surprised, but together they heaved the log onto the rising wall of the cabin. He looked at her then, a flicker of something new in his dark eyes. It might have been respect. From that day on, she worked beside him. She learned to strip bark from the logs, to mix mud and moss for chinking, her hands growing calloused and strong. They worked in their shared silence, a team bound by unspoken understanding. He was the architect, she was the apprentice. In the evenings, they would sit by the fire. The silence was comfortable now, a warm blanket they shared. One night, he was whittling a piece of scrap pine. He did it often, his hands never idle. She watched the slivers of wood curl away from his knife, revealing a shape within. For nights, she watched it take form. It was a hawk, its wings outstretched as if catching an updraft, its head tilted, its eyes sharp and fierce. It was beautiful. It was wild. It was free. When it was finished, sanded smooth with a piece of sandstone until it shone like polished bone, he did not put it on the mantel he had built. He held it out to her. She stared at his open palm. The hawk lay there, a perfect, miniature soul. "For you," he said. His voice was rough from disuse, but the words were clear. She reached out a trembling hand and took it. The wood was warm from his touch. It fit perfectly in her palm. It felt like he had reached inside her and carved the part of her she thought had died long ago, the part that wanted to soar. Tears welled in her eyes, hot and thick. She hadn't cried when she was sold. She hadn't cried on the trail. But this small, simple gift broke open something deep inside her. "Why?" she whispered, her own voice a stranger to her ears. He looked at her, his gaze steady and profound. "I saw it in you," he said. "The first day. They saw a plough horse. I saw a hawk." He finally spoke her name, a name he could have only guessed at or overheard in the brief, cruel transaction. Elara hearing her own name spoken with such reverence was like being born again. She was not the girl. She was not the burden. She was Elara. And he saw her. He truly saw her. She clutched the wooden hawk, its sharp edges pressing into her skin, and for the first time since she was a small child, she felt a flicker of impossible, terrifying hope. A year passed. The cabin became a home. Elara planted a garden, coaxing life from the rich valley soil. She learned the names of the plants, the tracks of the animals. Her body, once a source of shame, became a source of strength. It could haul water, chop wood, and walk for miles without tiring. She grew into her own skin, comfortable in the space she occupied. The silence between her and Silas was now filled with a quiet language of its own, a shared glance, a small smile, the simple comfort of presence. He had found a thin vein of gold in the creek, not enough to make them rich, but enough to trade for necessities, salt, flour, tools, and once, a bolt of soft blue cloth that he laid on the table for her without a word. She made a dress from it, her first new dress in a decade, and when she wore it, she saw him watch her with a quiet pride that made her feel more beautiful than any mirror ever could. Their life was a quiet rhythm of work, peace, and a deepening, unspoken affection. She no longer expected cruelty. She expected the safety of his presence, the warmth of his rare smiles, the steady beat of the life they had built together. But the outside world has a long memory. One afternoon in late summer, as she was weeding her garden, she heard a sound that did not belong in their valley, the sound of loud, boisterous voices and the jingle of unfamiliar tack. Her heart seized. Silas was up the creek, panning. She was alone. 2 men rode into their clearing. It was her father and her brother, Jed. They looked fatter, their clothes finer. But their faces held the same familiar blend of greed and contempt. Her father's eyes swept over the sturdy cabin, the neat garden, the smoke curling from the chimney. "Well, well," he boomed, his voice echoing unnaturally in the quiet valley. "Looks like the half-breed did all right for himself." And for you, his gaze fell upon her, and it was the old look, the look that measured her worth in livestock and labor. "We heard in town," Jed said, dismounting with an arrogant swagger. "Heard he struck gold. Heard you were living like a queen up here." They saw the gold. They didn't see the work, the sweat, the shared struggle. They only saw the profit. "What do you want?" Elara asked. Her voice didn't tremble. It was as steady as the mountain behind her. Her father laughed. "What do we want? We want what's ours. We made a bad trade, girl. That whiskey's long gone. It's time you came home. Family belongs with family. This is my home," she said, her hand unconsciously tightening on the handle of her weeding hoe. Jed took a step toward her. "Don't be a fool. You belong with your own kind. Not with him. We have a man for you to marry back home. A respectable man. A butcher. He appreciates a woman with some meat on her bones." The vulgarity of it, the sheer transactional horror, sent a wave of cold fury through her. They hadn't come for her. They had come for Silas's gold, and she was just the tool they would use to claim it. Just then, Silas appeared at the edge of the woods. He moved without a sound, a rifle held loosely in one hand. He didn't raise it. He just stood there, his presence a silent challenge. Her father puffed out his chest. "We've come for my daughter," he declared, as if speaking to a disobedient dog. "The law is on our side. A trade made under the influence ain't binding." Silas's eyes were on Elara. They held no command, only a question. The choice was hers. And in that moment, all the fear, all the shame, all the years of being a burden, fell away like a snake's shed skin. She dropped the hoe. She walked past her brother and her father and stood in front of Silas, turning to face them. She was his shield. He had been hers for a year. Now, it was her turn. "I am not your daughter," she said, her voice ringing with a clarity that stunned them into silence. "You forfeited that right on a saloon porch for a bottle of whiskey. I am not a mule to be traded. I am not an ox to be worked. I am not your property." She took a deep breath, the clean mountain air filling her lungs. "This is my home. This is my life. And this," she said, turning her head to look at the silent man behind her, her voice softening with a fierce and unbreakable love, "is my family." Jed lunged for her. "You ungrateful!" He never finished the sentence. Silas moved. He wasn't a blur of speed, but a force of nature. One hand shot out and seized Jed's wrist, his grip like iron. The other hand brought the rifle up, not pointing it, but holding it across his chest, a solid barrier of wood and steel. He didn't speak. He didn't have to. His eyes, cold as the creek in winter, did all the talking. Her father, a coward at his core, paled and backed away. He saw not a half-breed, but a mountain man on his own land, protecting what was his. And he saw a woman he no longer recognized, standing tall and defiant, a queen in her own right. Defeated, they mounted their horses, spitting curses that were swallowed by the vastness of the valley. Ilara watched them go until they were nothing more than a bad memory disappearing down the trail. When they were gone, she turned to Silas. He was still watching her, but the coldness was gone from his eyes, replaced by a warmth that was more powerful than the sun. He lowered the rifle and gently touched her cheek, his thumb brushing away a tear she hadn't realized had fallen. "You are a hawk," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "I knew it." She leaned into his touch, finally, truly, free. They never saw her father or brother again. Their lives settled back into the peaceful rhythm they had built, but it was different. The last shadow had been banished. Ilara's voice, once found, was never lost again. She sang as she worked in her garden. She talked with Silas by the fire, sharing stories of her childhood, the good and the bad, exorcising the ghosts of her past. He listened, always listened, his quiet presence a balm to her soul. He spoke more, too. Not much, but enough. He told her of his own past, of a mother from the people of the mountains and a father from the world of the white man, and of belonging to neither. In their shared valley, they had created a world where they both belonged. Her love for him was as vast and as solid as the mountains that cradled them. And his for her was in every log he had cut for their home, every bit of food he provided, every glance of pride and deep affection. He loved her not in spite of her size or her past, but because of the fierce, resilient spirit he had seen from the very beginning. He loved her because she was Ilara. One spring, they found a young boy wandering near the edge of their valley, thin and scared, an orphan cast out from a settlement to the south. Ilara was the one who saw him first. She approached him not with pity, but with a bowl of warm stew and a quiet understanding. She saw the fear in his eyes and knew it intimately. She and Silas took him in, giving him a home, a purpose, and the same quiet respect they had given each other. She taught him how to plant a garden. Silas taught him how to read the land. As she watched the boy begin to heal, to stand a little taller each day, she would often touch the small wooden hawk she kept on the mantelpiece. It was a reminder of who she had been, and who she had become. She had been the girl traded for whiskey, a burden deemed worthless. But one man's quiet choice, his ability to see the hawk inside the cage, had changed everything. He hadn't rescued her. He had simply given her the space to rescue herself. She was not a possession. She was a partner. She was not an outcast. She was a queen in a kingdom of two, a kingdom built of love, respect, and the enduring strength of the human spirit. Please like, share, and subscribe to support more true-hearted stories on the hopeful frontier. If you had seen her there, on that dusty porch, would you have stepped in too? Tell us in the comments.